and shoving the folder back into her bag. Any of her colleagues, she thought ruefully, might have had their hearts broken by twice as many applicants in the same amount of time. In the real world, of course, Portia was no slower a reader than anyone else. She could fully scan the New York Times while waiting in line for her habitual and necessary Americano at Small World Coffee, half a block from the Fitz-Randolph gate of Princeton University. She had even, once, completed Vikram Seth's A Suitable Boy during a week-long visit to her mother in Vermont, when, admittedly, the whole point had been to evade Susanna, especially when she wanted to talk. 1,500 pages in 7 days. Not too shabby. But she was well aware of her reputation as the slowest reader in Princeton's Office of Admission. Singular. Nota bene, not plural. And she probably deserved it. With an application open before her, Portia could almost feel herself decelerate, parsing the sentences and correcting the grammar, fixing the spelling, rereading to make sure she at least knew what they'd managed to say, if not what they'd meant to say, even as she took the temperature of her anxiety at falling behind, because she couldn't stop herself from lingering on the kids. She wasn't supposed to think of them as kids, she knew that. Few of them sounded like kids. They were trying so hard not to be young. They were ventriloquizing the attorneys they thought they wanted to be, or the neuroscientists, or the statesmen. They were trying to sound as though they already worked at Morgan Stanley, or toiled at a feeding station in Darfur, or were doing surgery. But so often the newness of them, the flux of their emerging selves, would poke through the essays or the recommendations, stray references to how Jimmy had grown since his difficult freshman year, or Jimmy's own regrettable use of the word awesome. Their confidence was sometimes so hollow, it practically echoed off the page. They were all so young, even the ones who had already seen so much. In this batch, on this brief flight, already there had been a wizened 17-year-old who lived with her younger brother in an apartment in South Boston, their parents back home in Taiwan. She wrote of the microwavable meals she prepared for her bisected family, and the bureaucracy she had learned to manipulate for herself, the weekly phone calls from Mom, who had never been able to attend a parent-teacher conference, being unable to speak English and, incidentally, on the other side of the planet, but wasn't it worth it? Because she had 6 AP scores of 5 and 4 more exams still to be taken? Because she was first in her class of 400, with a very realistic chance of getting into a first-tier college and achieving her dream of becoming a doctor? And the boy from Holyoke, whose mother had left her 2 oldest children to cross the border for her day job in a medical supply factory and her night job at Wendy's, whose father was described as, quote, unknown/no information, unquote, who was a physics whiz and captain of the soccer team and all-state, who was applying not just for admission to Princeton, but for admission to America. And this last, from a girl in Greenwich, Connecticut, who was smart enough to know that she wasn't smart enough, only just very, very smart, and wrote with preemptive defeat about her hospital internship and the inspiration of her older brother, who had survived childhood cancer to attend law school. Smart enough to know about, or at least imagine, the ones she would be compared with, who had been handed so much less than she, and done so much more with what they had, while the children of privilege were penalized for having been fortunately born, comfortably raised, and excellent in all of the ordinary ways. Sometimes those were the ones who got to Portia most of all. It was a sparsely occupied flight, of course. If it hadn't been, if there were, for example, a businessman or grandmother or, worst of all, high school-age kid within sight of her seat, she would never have extracted from her bag and opened, and then studied, the contents of these very private, very freighted files. Instinctively, Portia closed the folders whenever the single, tight-lipped attendant cruised the aisle, glancing at people's laps. She dropped her white plastic